I got the idea of, I think, joining the Marine Corps, seeing a John Wayne movie, Sands of Iwo Jima, that always strikes a strong desire in most anybody. As a 17-year-old coming out of high school, I knew everything, and I had the master plan. Recruiter called me and said, you scored very high on your mental test, and we can offer you guaranteed aviation. And hell, I didn't care. I just want to get in the Marine Corps, So they signed me up for guaranteed aviation. And of course, that made you sort of a prima donna that drill instructors weren't so sure that they wanted to, celebrate you. They had their own comments about the aviation Marines. But I went to Camp Matthews and I shot high on the range and made PFC and went on from there. Went to Memphis, Tennessee to get my aviation and helicopter maintenance training, and they made me an 83, 81 helicopter mechanic. Anyway, I did get to LTA in Santa Ana, and I went into HMM 364, I think it was HMR 360, or 363. I learned my trade over there and became a plane captain, and they were forming up HMM 364 to go to the atomic tests at Johnson Island. We were going to be the support helicopter squadron for picking up instrument capsules that were being shot up through the atomic blast to gain data. We had a Geiger counter in the plane, and we found most of them because we had an oscilloscope inside the crew section, and the signal going out, you could tell the pilot to vector right or vector left, and when you centered up that sine wave on the oscilloscope, you were dead on the thing and you went right into it. Well, to protect us, which we found out later they didn't give a damn about us, they had brown paper the inside of the helicopter, so after the mission they could take all this brown paper and wad it up and put it in a special radioactive storage area. And they let us go take a saltwater shower, but we did get to see half a dozen atomic blasts go off out there. 4th of July was never quite the same after watching atomic bombs go off over your head. And we went 2 tours out there. There was Dominic 1 and Dominic 2. That last Thor missile they tried to launch, we were sitting on the deck of the aircraft carrier, and you watched, and you knew they were going to go off because you'd see the missile light off on the bottom. And Thors were supposedly very, very reliable because they were solid fuel. And it kept getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and then finally it just blew up right on the island. Well, the warhead didn't blow up, but the missile blew up. And we had flight, this is, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So as soon as sunlight came on, we were all ready to launch. All our planes were on the flight deck anyway. We had to go in and evacuate people out of the island. So we landed at the launch site, and I get out of the plane, and all these guys in white suits are running around, and they're picking up all these pieces. They have Geiger counters, they're picking up all these pieces of blown up missile, and they're putting them in these bags and clearing the area. And I found out later they had half a dozen what we called UDT or frogmen out there, because if there were a lot of missiles, they didn't know where they're at, so they didn't want to blow the bomb off. So they would destroy the missile, and these atomic warheads would drop in the coral area around Johnson Island. Well, there were a lot of Russian trawlers and Russian subs out there that wanted that technology. So the frogmen would race out to find these warheads so that they could go down and retrieve them and bring them back. And a lot of those guys died of radioactive poisoning and various ailments from radioactivity. In fact, I think there's only maybe one of them left. I communicate with some of the Army guys that were in the blockhouses yet today, and we've tried to get information out to those in 364 that how to go about claiming to be an atomic veteran, because there's various illnesses associated with ionized radiation that they need to know about. And most VAs don't know anything about it, from what I found out, because there's very few of us out there that are in that category. Well, we had to come back to the States while they rebuilt the launch area, and I was getting ready to go on leave. I hadn't been on leave since boot camp, and I had my leave papers in my hand, and CO came out and says all leaves are canceled. So we're leaving next week to go back to Johnson Island. So, back we went and spent another tour there, and this tour went very very clean, and they had a lot more launches, a lot more successes, and what they were trying to do. These were the last altitude tests before the treaty, the non-prolific treaty, went into effect that we had signed, and they were trying to develop smaller and smaller warheads for artillery rounds and bombs and whatever. But that was a pretty heady experience, because we'd be down there for 2 weeks, and we'd go back a day and a half sail to Pearl Harbor, and so we just screwed around for 2 weeks in Pearl Harbor, and used the military 150, 145 to do some touring with our choppers around the islands, and saw some wonderful sights from the air. And I fell in love with the place. I've been back many times, and it's one place in the world when I step my feet down, I feel totally relaxed. There was one incident there that I can remember that was kind of unique, and I've written some of these things for 364, but Major M.T. Janelle was our CO, and he was somewhat boisterous at the officers club at times, and this guy was carrying on what a wonderful baseball team he had. And of course, Major Janelle said, well, our squadron won the West Coast championships. And so the gauntlet was thrown. And so, we had a muster the next morning and said, anybody with baseball experience, we need you to go to special services and see if you can find a mitt. And maybe a couple of balls to throw around. We had maybe one funky practice, but we were no baseball team by any shadow of the imagination. And we did make a grand entry. We had 3 choppers that we brought in, and we peeled hard over the field, and we landed in center field, and we had 6 or 8 coolers full of beer. And we hauled those over to the opposing side's dugout. And, they were just beating our ass, something terrible. And until about the 5th inning, and we'd hit the ball and they'd just point at it, and they were so drunk they couldn't hardly even get out on the field, and we ended up beating them. And we definitely didn't have a good baseball team, but we had a hell of a better plan of attack than they did. But it was those kind of things that I think helped bond the squadron together, and many of these same guys that were in the squadron, that trained with the squadron, were the core of the squadron when it went overseas. And of course, I was a crew chief on Major Janelle's plane, and that helped me get to be a corporal in 18 months in the Marine Corps, because I had a coffee mess in there, and every morning I would pick up donuts and coffee and juice, and he loved to take other officers out to get their 4 hours in, and he'd always call down and ask what was on the menu today. And I would send up certain donuts and rolls and bagels and stuff, and I always kept a change of clothes in the plane, because he would show up with people and say, we're going to Tucson or we're going to Frisco, and off we'd go for a few days. So I earned my stripes by being available and making his plane special. And when we weren't doing those missions, I was Simonizing the plane. That thing looked like a Cadillac. And so it was my dismay when they said the squadron was going to go overseas, and I didn't have enough time left in my enlistment to go overseas with them. So I went to 462, hated that squadron. Anyway, I worked a back door deal with 364, and got reassigned back to 364 because they were short of crew chiefs and they were getting close to going overseas. So Unbeknownst to 462, one day orders came through for me and my buddy to go back to 364, and we fled out of there. Well, actually, we were already moved over to 364 because we knew it was coming. But then there was all of the preparation that went into going overseas, getting all of the stuff stocked up, everything crated, everything inventoried. But we ended up going on the USNS Breton, which was a jeep carrier from World War II, and all the planes were cocooned in latex, and some on the flight deck, some on the hangar deck, and we actually had 6 F-104s going to Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan. But they had a map of the Pacific Ocean, and you'd get down there and look how far you'd gone, and my God, you'd only gone about this far on this thing. I think we took 20 some odd days to get over there, and there were some guys that never did get out of bed because they were sick the whole damn way. But we found that if you ate soda crackers in vast quantities, it would soak up the juices in your stomach, and the soda kept your stomach from getting too turned. And what that did for you, you got to run a lot more extra duty because you were the only guy not sick to walk, make sure all those planes were chained down. But we did finally get to Okinawa, and more training, of course, there. Actually got shoot some M60 at some 55-gallon barrels up on some hillsides on the Marine base up north of us. But long day getting there the first day. We flew down, I think it was, the last day of January 1964. And we were on C-130, got up about 4 in the morning, took off from Kadena Air Force Base, and flew down to Vietnam, and we were on final. And they waved us off. They said the government had changed hands, and we had to fly to Manila, refuel. They wouldn't let us land in Vietnam. We flew back to Okinawa. Got up the next morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, because the government was in friendly hands. Flew back down the next day, landed, and took over. There'd been a forward group down there getting set up, but when the full squadron got down there, it was a little unnerving because you had to take over all the missions all at once, and none of us had ever flown in those kind of conditions before. And of course, our pilots didn't know where all those bases were, and we were the blind leading the blind, and but you fell into it pretty quickly. I remember the very first mission I was on. You think you can see these VC, not like you have a big ass sign and say, "Look, be scared of me." And I think my eyeballs were coming out of my head as I'm looking at anything moving down there, and all of a sudden there's this big explosion and plane drops about 100 feet. And, I looked down and I got red all over my flak vest, and holy shit, I've been hit. I said, it doesn't feel that bad, and I said, God, there's a lot of blood here. I better find out where the hole is and try to sight. And I almost mic'd the intercom and told the pilot I was wounded. God, that would have made that tour awful long if I'd have told him that. And I tasted it was 8381 or 5606 hydraulic fluid. We'd blown a primary line right over my head, and it had sprayed down all over me. So that was my only wound I really got in Vietnam. But the missions were so varied, and one day you'd be training South Vietnamese pilots. The next day you'd be taking troops out, and then you'd be trying to support them with materials, and then you'd be picking up their wounded and their dead. And after a while you hardened up to the fact that this was going to be an awfully long war. We ended up having to take the seats out of the planes, because if they were sitting in a troop seat and they had their seatbelt on, you could not get their ass out of the plane when you hit a zone, especially a hot zone. So we took all the seats out and made them sit on the floor, because you could generally yank their fingers out on just the rings on the floor, the cargo rings, but generally we would get them to stand up. And I had a Lance Corporal Henderson was my gunner, and he was like a linebacker on a football team, just big, tough guy. And became a labor enforcer for the electrical union on the docks down in Long Beach after he got out of the service. But he would yell at him, they'd turn around and look at him, and he'd start at him, and they would start backing up to the door, and I'd throw their ass out. And sometimes, they would start crawling back in, so I'd have to make the pilot tell them to lift off a little bit so they couldn't climb in, and we could still throw them out. And I'm saying, who the hell are we fighting this war for? If they wouldn't get out of the goddamn plane, why are we here? I remember another mission we went on. We were going to pick up a kid that had got hit in the stomach, and he needed some medical attention real fast. And these were mainly Army Special Forces bases that we were covering at that time in the I-Corps area up north. And we fly into this base, and the guy comes running up to the plane, and he gets in, and then there's about 20 other guys that come running up the plane. They all got forged evacuation passes on their jackets, and they start flooding the plane. Well, hell, I had so many people in the plane, we couldn't even take off. So pretty soon, we got the same plan. Henderson's throwing these people at me, and I'm throwing them out the door, and the Army Special guys are over there with great big hickory, like bats, beating these guys over the head in submission so they couldn't crawl back in the plane. I'm using the machine gun as a battering ram, knock them in the face as they come up over the doorway to keep them out so we get the hell out of there. And all the time pilots said, can we lift, can we lift, can we lift? Hell no, we got about 16 guys down here. But we had another incident that we went down to a base, another Special Forces base, and they were all pretty much the same. They had barbed wire on the outside, they had listening and firing pits around the fences, and then the blockhouse in the center was their key communications center for their operation, kept their ammo there, and they generally have some mortars back there, but these guys were going out on patrol. There were 2 squads going out on patrol in the evening, and a sniper shot around at them as they were going through their own minefield, and they forgot that, and they panicked and ran. And now all the explosions are going off as they're stepping on mines, which created even more panic. And in a few brief moments, they all blew themselves up. So the Special Forces guys sent in a couple more guys to help those that were dying or wounded. They in turn immediately blew themselves up. So they said, well, we'll wait till morning, and they knew where the mines were in the pattern. So the Special Forces guys went out and picked them up. And the next morning we flew into this base, which was pretty good because we had good communication with them. That was always a problem between our pilots and their communication, whether we were at the right base or not. And we knew it was the right base here because we saw all these ponchos down there with the boots. Some had boots, some didn't because they'd blown their feet off and legs. And so we didn't want to make a lot of runs on this. It's not the kind of cargo you like to haul. I think mines were some of the worst kind of injuries because it shreds everything it projects under your eyes, your ears, your nose, and everything's black from the heat of the blast. And so Larry and I they had stretchers, and Larry and I took the stretchers and we started flipping them over. We were going to build a pile on the plane, and Jesus, the South Vietnamese went crazy. That was so disrespectful. They're more respectful of their dead than they are of their wounded. They would let people walk for miles in the jungle, wounded until they died, and then they'd tie them on a pole like a shot tiger, and they'd carry them for days till they could get them home for a proper burial. Well, we had to negotiate how we were going to do this. They wanted us to rig litter straps, and my God, that takes too much time, And so we said, okay, we'll keep them on the stretchers, and we'll just put them in with the handles off to the side, so none of the handles were on anybody's face. So we had these things piled up, crisscrossed in the 34 all the way to the ceiling. And I can hardly see Henderson over there and hear all these faces, or sort of faces, looking at you as the wind blew their. And we didn't have the rubber bags that they had later. They just had them on a stretcher, and sometimes they'd wind a kerchief around their head and do the best they can. But that was a long flight back. They hadn't been dead that long. You always ask that question when you went after KIAs, is how long have they been out there? Because they broke down pretty quickly, and it had that gamey smell to it. But those are things but the burn flesh and that gamey smell. Every time you smell that, like when I go to the dentist and he's drilling on a tooth or something, and there's that smell, it goes straight to your brain for that time and what you were doing when you smelled that before. Probably the one of the more exciting missions I guess I went on, it was with Warrant Officer Patton. There was an outpost up in Indian country going south and then east of Da Nang. It was under attack and they were running out of ammunition. They were going to be overrun that night. It was a big force that was hitting them. And they must have been NBAs. They were just starting to get NBAs in at that time over by the trail. And we flew 3 planes out, and we were supposed to pick up like 4,000 pounds of ammunition. They only had maybe a couple thousand pounds of ammunition for us. So one of our planes went down with hydraulic problems, so we had 2 planes now. So we flew out, we picked up 2 gunships along the way. The 52nd CAD group out of Pleiku had been loaning us 6 gunships to fly cover for us because we were doing all the work for their special forces up north. Great bunch of guys. What a super team when you get lower ranking officers that work things out together, and you're not having generals say, no, they can't do that because they're Army, and they can't do that because they're Marines. It was like the same squadron of working together in tactics. That we got up there, and I started seeing tracers going up. It was the first time I'd ever seen tracers, because Kong didn't have tracers. They didn't have machine guns that had tracers. And they're trailing behind a couple of our planes. And as we were coming up, we couldn't find this base, and word went out, does anybody speak French? And so we tried a few words in French. We didn't get, we must have been on the wrong frequency, but never did get the base, but we saw which base was on fire. They would ring with gunfire. And Warrant Officer Patton, I think one of the best pilots we ever had, that really knew how to fly that aircraft. He would train pilots at LTA, and he would do a 360 up in the hills. He would be headed forward doing a 360, drop in altitude all the way down, and then the last roll he'd come around and his front wheels would be pacing forward. And he said, well, you can do that and you're going to be a decent pilot. But he took it in, and the general procedure was the gunships would be on each side, and they'd rake the front end of the base with their 4 M60s and 2.75 rockets, and they would be guarding our chopper. And our chopper landed, they would peel back around real sharp, and you didn't want to be on the ground more than about 5 or 10 seconds. And Warrant Officer Patton was coming out the other end, and they would come behind him and rake the backside as they were trying to get altitude. Well, as we were heading back to Da Nang, we noticed one of the Hueys was just spraying fuel all over. He'd picked up a round, and we were afraid his exhaust might ignite the fuel, the JP4. So he went down and landed on this sandbar next to a village, and it was just unbelievable. The whole sky lighted up, and the only thing I could think was it was like these World War II films where the kamikazes were coming in on the carriers, and the sky was just full of bullets and flashes, and I'm just mesmerized. And finally the pilot said, Smith, you're going to give him some of that shit back. So I opened up with my M60, and it was the first time I'd been able to use tracers, and I found if I locked on a tracer train and I took it down, pretty soon they'd stop, and I'd pick up another one, I'd go down, and then they'd stop, and you pretty much figured you got to the source of where they were coming from. Well, Patton went down and picked up the crew out of this chopper, And they got in and got out so fast they forgot to take their machine guns or do anything with the chopper. So we're flying around trying to figure out what the hell we're going to do with all this ammunition and 4 M60 machine guns. Or I think they may have had 6 of them down there because each door gunner had one. It would have been a wonderful prize for the Viet Cong that shot it down. But we finally got authorization to try to burn it. And so with our remaining ammunition, we thought we knew where it was. We were just shooting the sky full of bullets, and it was dark at that time. We used up all our ammunition, and we're getting low on fuel. Didn't get on fire, so we said, hell, let's get the hell out of here. We went back to Da Nang. The next day, they sent some rangers out. They would always send Vietnamese rangers out because the Viet Cong didn't like them. Another mission, I think, that went down in my mind is an awfully long day. In fact, I started smoking that day, a habit that I went for 20 years on until I got some sense. But they got me up in the morning. You know, you only had to fly 5 missions a month to get combat pay. And I already had my missions in. They wake me up about 4 in the morning and say, get down the flight line. You're on a mission roster. And I said, no, get somebody else. I got my 5 missions. Get somebody that needs some combat pay. I said, no, your name's on the list. Well, what kind of mission is this? So you get down to the flight line, and they're rolling 55-gallon drums of avgas in the plane, and backpacks, and rations, and extra weapons. And I said, well, where are we going? We can't tell you yet. I said, that doesn't sound good. So we go up to the old Quezon. There was an old Quezon and a new Quezon base. And the old Quezon base was right up next to the Laotian border. It was almost in the, it had to be very close to where the later one was at. But we had a secret Air Force communication station up there that was guarded by some Marines. And what was going on there is they were setting up for the war that was coming. And they were flying photo reconnaissance squadrons into northern Laos and in North Vietnam. They were also setting up, we actually flew into North Vietnam and tracked some of their communications because they knew what was coming. The runways were getting longer, they were building more hangars. We actually, a couple days after we went up there, we found out that they had a Navy pilot that had been shot down in a plane of jars, and they were still monitoring his escape radio, and they finally told us what we're going to do. So, well, what's all this gas for? I said, well, we can't get to him and get back. So we rocked the planes as much as we could, and we hand cranked as much fuel in them as we could. We said, we're going to try to pick him up and then get it close to Thailand as we can, and then Air America will burn our planes, and Air America will pick us up and take us the rest of the way in. I said, well, I know an F-8U Crusader does 1,800 miles an hour across the deck. That's why they're using it for a photo plane. I said, we do about 130 knots. I said, and we're just a big-ass green target. I said, what the hell they shoot him down with? They said, well, they had some quad-mounted radar-controlled 50-caliber machine guns. I said, now, what kind of frickin' chance? You know, we had seen what 50s do when you only had 30s. You drop about 1,000 yards in front of them. I said, oh my God, this is terrible. I found out later, just recent in the last few months, that they've opened up some of these files, that the Secretary of Defense was not going to go after this guy. And that's why we were waiting up there. They had already had a guy down where he wasn't supposed to be. And the admiral that commanded the 7th Fleet called the President of the United States and said, listen, I'm sending pilots out every day to do dangerous missions. And this guy had actually been hit the day before and made it back to his carrier, and went out the next day and got shot down. He says, I can't be sending pilots out unless you're going to help me go after them. And that's their expectation. And that's when they finally launched Air America out of Thailand. They had 4 choppers just like ours. 3 of them got shot down on the way, and they used the remaining chopper to get the hell out of there. Well, a month later, supposedly, Lieutenant Clausman, escaped after being captured, and he made his way to a Hmong tribal village, and they contacted CIA. CIA picked him up and got him the hell out of the Pacific, and you never heard from him again. But it was kind of a juicy period of time. We had a lot of CIA guys around out in the boondocks. For me, I didn't know how they could think they were fitting in. I mean, big ass, tall, white-faced Americans trying to pretend they were Orientals, but it was not. Anyway, that was toward the end of our tour there, and one outpost that we did a lot of work was Nam Dong, which was just north and a little bit west of Da Nang, and Captain Donlin was there at the time, and Captain Donlin was the very first person in Vietnam that got a Medal of Honor. We had pulled out of there and were back in Okinawa when that base got hit, and it was completely wiped out. And for a lot of the actions that he did there, he got the Medal of Honor. But we knew and worked with him and his troops quite a bit. So that made that Medal of Honor kind of a personal, stamp of the kind of activities that we were engaged in. But I guess it was a lot of the other fun things, or funny things of, loading out all of the food alive. We had chickens, we had ducks, we had pigs, we had cows. You could put 2 cows into a 34, but it was like putting shoes in a shoebox. One had to be front, one had to be back. The other thing that none of these animals had ever flown very much before, so they got kind of scared. And the first thing they do, you'd start the engine up, and they'd urinate all over the place, and then you'd kick that rotor, and that planetary gear system would just howl and moan and groan, and they'd defecate all over on top. We'd have piles of pigs that would be defecating, and every once in a while, they would be they'd be in wicker baskets and have reeds across the back of them, and they'd get loose and be running around terrorizing the inside of the plane. You'd boot their ass out. Be looking like they didn't fly well, but they were nice streamlined after they got their nose down, and they'd just go like, a rocket right into wherever you're flying over. But I always, when I was flying cargo, I'd always keep a couple bags of 200-pound bags of rice right by the door, because if you're going in, we would fly off at sea level, and then you go north and you get into the mountains, you'd be up a couple thousand feet, and the air was a little rare up there, and you start losing some turns going into a tight zone. You can't get those turns back. And so if you kick 400 pounds of weight out the door, it's like flying in a balloon and dropping ballast off the side. I always thought, I told people I thought I fed more Viet Cong than I ever did North Vietnamese, but we hated to haul out the paymaster, because if you paid these guys, in every base, he'd go to every base and he'd pay them, and pay them in cash, and they'd be gone the next day. So here you got 12 Army Special Forces, 18 guys, and nobody there, but all kinds of weapons and all kinds of ammunition. So we'd have emergency flights out there, pick up all the ammunition and all of the weapons, fly back to Da Nang. And 3 or 4 days later, they'd run out of money, and they'd go back where the food was, where the rice was. So now you had 120, 30 guys out there with these Army Special Forces guys and no weapons. So now you had to rush all the goddamn weapons back out, along with the ammunition. And so if you're going along and you're looking, in the pile, and you see a weapon down there, a Swedish K or a Schmeiser or a Thompson or, a fully auto carbine, you just trade what you had and put it on the pile. And I had gone over there with a German Luger, and that we found was a prestigious kind of thing. Any Vietnamese that saw somebody with a pistol, you had to be pretty high ranking kind of dude, But also body hair was a something they didn't have, and I think American Indians don't have a lot of facial hair or body hair, and you'd be sitting in the plane, and you'd feel something on your arm, and you didn't really want to open up your eyes, because it it felt kind of funny. And you look down, and here was this trainee petting the hair on your arm, and it was just a little unnerving. So we would grow mustaches because they'd try, they had like 3 hairs growing off their chin, and they thought they were pretty bad men, And we had this Corporal Fox, beautiful handlebar mustache, and he just waxed that thing up and he just trimmed it, and it was just perfect. And he slept right beside me in the barracks, and these were old French-born Legion barracks, tile roofs, and what they'd used in all of their wars over there and the colonization. And in the middle of the night, there's these horrendous screaming. I thought, holy shit, somebody snuck in the back door and they've knifed him, and we're under attack. And a lot of times I slept with my Luger, and lights went on, and he's laying on the floor, and his rack and the bamboo's all broken, and he's just eyes as big as silver dollars. He's breathing awful hard. I said, what the hell went on? He said, I thought I felt something. I woke up, and this big-ass jungle rat about the size of a cat was sitting on his chest, and it was eating the wax off his mustache. And he says, I got really panicked. So he said, I threw it. It bounced off the mosquito net. It came back, landed on my arm. He said, when it wrapped that big-ass tail around, that's when I went kind of bananas and started trying to beat him against the bamboo to kill the little bastard. But they weren't big. They were big. They lived in the village next to our base. Came over to eat at our place. And generally they would leave, in the morning, and the flies would come in behind them. Well, that next morning, a whole lot of us were down there shaving these things off. We didn't want any visitation of the rats in our place anymore. But we would a lot of times put lizards, the camellias, in our racks and tuck the mosquito netting around, and they would eat any insect that was inside there, and then you could put them out at night, But you learn the tricks of the trade. You get back from a late mission, we kept a pile of wood by the shower, you throw a stick in to chase all the rats out because they go there for the water, and then you could take a shower by yourself. But I was you'd always be asked to eat with, you'd go out to a base, and the special forces guys say, well, have a meal with us, and you always wanted to resist that because they were used to eating that food and all of the stuff that went with it. And generally, if you ate with them, you'd had dysentery for like 3 days. There was always a scene when you're flying along with about 10, 12 Vietnamese in your plane, and you have to pull your flight suit down and sit on a bucket at 2,000 feet because you're not going to make it to the next stop. They start pointing at the American crew chief up there that's taking a crap, in the middle of their flight. But you just become adaptable as you go along. You know where the hot zones are, and you know where the milk runs are, and you sort of prepare yourself mentally. And I think it's the Marine Corps training, the discipline, and the knowing what to do in crisis that pulls a lot of those missions through, because you don't panic. You panic when you get home and you think about what you went through, and your adrenaline is still blowing your eyes out. But at the time, you react to what you were trying to do, and that's the right thing to do. Generally, they don't have to tell you what to do. And you also develop very strong relationships and team efforts between pilots and crew members working together. And I think that carries you on. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I had a Triumph TR4, 1964. I bought in Okinawa, waiting on the docks in Long Beach. Picked it up, drove it up Route 66 to Lafayette, Indiana. I was 22 years old, just back from overseas, and having gone to, Sapporo, Japan, to Bangkok, Thailand, Manila, Hong Kong a couple times, and seen a big part of the Orient, and been in combat, and I had absolutely nothing in common with the freshman class at Purdue University when I started in the spring of '65. The first thing I did, I went to Purdue's Aviation Technology School, and I got my A&P license, and I worked. Purdue had its own airport, its own airlines, and I worked at the airport 20 hours a week while I completed my BS degree at Purdue, and that was a little better pay than flipping burgers. And I interviewed a number of companies when I graduated in 1970. I found out that DD-214 was a valuable piece of paper because a lot of guys I was interviewing with were ex-World War II military personnel, and they didn't interview very many combat veterans that were my age that had full deferments for their companies at that time. So I had a lot of job offers coming out. I ended up going to work for Dow Chemical Company in Midland, Michigan. I had many duties up there, from construction to purchasing to running departments, and it was a major operation. It was one of Dow's largest plants. It covered 4.5 square miles. I put 30 years in with them, and the other way I ended up going to work for them is I promised my wife I'd never work for a chemical company, and because they were just horrendous smelling, and you never knew what you're going to get into. But at the time I was at Purdue campus, there was a lot of activists on campus, and every time Dow would come down, it was the napalm issue. And so I signed up to see if these clowns would try to stop me, and they didn't. They let me come through. They saw I was somewhat determined, I think, and was picking a fight. But I got into the Dow recruiter, and I said, "Hey, I just want to be upfront with you." I said, I really don't want to work for a chemical company. He had that look on his face that, like, shit, I got to talk to another one of these clowns. And I said, "No, I came here to shake your hand and thank you for making napalm. It saved our ass a number of times, and there's a whole bunch of folks over there loves to see that shit raining off the underside of those A1 Sky Raiders." I said, "Keep pumping that stuff out." I said, "Great product. It just depends on who's receiving it." And he says, "Sit down." He says, "You don't get to make a decision about Dow till you come to Midland, Michigan. You meet a number of folks that we have working up there, or see what other products we make. And we appreciate finally hearing somebody thanking us for what we did." And what I really did find out is it's a thixotropic agent, which it doesn't burn at all. It looks like sawdust, and we used to use it in our flamethrowers. But it just thickens things. And we had things that thicken gasoline or organic products, and we had things that thicken water-based, and that's what they put in baby diapers. Same kind of stuff, but it thickens urine. And I had a great career there. They gave me a lot of opportunities, gave me a lot of training, and helped me to where I am today, really, as far as at least being able to save some money and buy a house and put my daughter through school, and although she's still in school, but hopefully she's going to get her PhD in biophysics this year, and she'll be on her way to a good career. But I got with Frank Gullich a number of years ago when he wanted to start a website. And we felt like at that time we hadn't got a very good welcome back here in the United States. And there was a lot of residual kind of anger in people. And we thought if we had a website where we had pictures that I supplied a lot of, and I started writing some of my experiences down, that this might help people open up and realize that they were part of a much bigger thing, and that we were still that team together. And these occasions that we have in Mesquite prove that every couple years. And I don't know of very many military organizations that have the esprit de corps that 364 has and continues to have down through the ranks. And probably the greatest thing that I see here is when the young crew chiefs and the young pilots and members of the squadron come up, and we get to meet them, and they get to hear a little bit of the history from us. And they just always seem a lot smarter and a lot better shape than I ever remember I was ever in. But it says a lot for the military today, and we see too much of what's written about youth of America, and we don't see enough people like these young people that today are in the military doing the job and are the same good people we were when we went in. And I guess that's where I think I'll probably end this interview.